This is Center Stage, putting your firm in the spotlight by highlighting business owners and other industry experts to help take your firm to the next level. Hey everyone, and welcome to Center Stage. I'm your host, John Henson. And this week we're talking about stress and mental health and all of those lovely things. To be honest, I'll be honest with you guys, I have been stressed out, high level since probably June. I was planning a wedding. I was moving into a new role here at Spotlight Branding. COVID is still a thing. Holidays are always, a stressful time. And so I've been just up here and just trying to find ways to manage it and just kind of keep my sanity. And, we all deal with it. And I know, especially in the legal industry, financial pros, all of that, you guys deal with a ton of stress. There's all kinds of reports out there just about the mental health struggles, especially in these industries. And so I wanted to have someone on to talk about the ways to beat stress and to just kind of rewire our mindset and just keep, kind of pushing forward. And so this week I have Rachel Druckenmiller from Unmuted. She has just devoted her life to just talking about, topics like these and just helping professionals all over the country beat stress. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. This is going to be a very, very important conversation that I feel like regardless of what, profession, folks that are listening could share this with family members,
Absolutely.
Really anybody can use this message. So
yeah, 100%. So before we dive in, just kind of introduce yourself a little bit. What should we know about you, and your background?
Let's see, I'm the daughter of two entrepreneurs. And so I kind of grew up in an unusual environment where I saw people really having a lot of, sense of autonomy over their lives, which I'll come back to that at some point later. I was always interested in human behavior. I grew up with my dad listening to Tony Robbins and watching Oprah. And so I kind of always had this possibility mindset that I feel like was ingrained in me from a young age. I studied psychology in undergrad. I worked for an insurance brokerage firm for, as an intern, and then the first 13 years of my career, thinking that that's one of those fields that you're not, when you're 10, you're like, I want to work in insurance,
Right.
But I had a lot of autonomy there. They gave me a long leash. My former CEO jokes said, "What leash? You just got to do whatever you wanted."
Oh, those are the best though.
It was really great. So I got into the field of corporate wellness in 2007, which was kind of an earlier, foray into that space about 15 years ago when it wasn't as much of a buzz as it is now. Right. And I really made a way for myself. And, I realized early on in that profession that there had to be more to being well than just tracking our steps, eating broccoli and drinking water, which is for most people what like a wellness program is. And right. It wasn't until my own journey with burnout in 2016 and 2017 where I got so sick that I ended up with Epstein-Barr virus, which is an acute form of mono. I lost my voice. I got sicker than I've ever been. I would sleep 12 hours a night for months and not feel rested. I mean, I was really, really, really sick. And I had burned out. I had just burned out and bottomed out. And I was the director of well-being, which made this all the more ironic. And I was like, geez, if I can't figure this out, and I have all this, I'm a health coach, and I'm trained in culinary nutrition, and I have a master's degree in health science, and I have a background in psychology. If I'm struggling with this, my goodness,
right?
A lot of other people must find this to be really challenging too. And
yeah.
So 2017, I started speaking about as I was learning it myself. So it wasn't like I've arrived, listen to me. It was, hey, I'm figuring this out. Come along the journey with me as I learn how to beat burnout and how to begin to live a life that works better. And so 2 years ago, 2019, 2.5, I left that job because the thing I loved to do more than anything was to speak and train and facilitate. And I said, I don't want to do any of that other stuff. I just want to do the thing I love the most all the time. And I left and it's been incredible. I've done over 250 virtual learning experiences that I've facilitated since March of 2020. I had to completely flip. 80% of my business disappeared when COVID hit because it was all my only source of income was in-person speaking engagements.
Right.
And I had to get really creative and do that on the heels of getting hit by a pickup truck 6 weeks after COVID and fracturing my back.
Jeez.
I was out running. Yeah, I wasn't in a vehicle. I was out running and got hit. So all this to say, I come by these insights honestly as someone who's been through some stuff. Not like I read a book and I read an article and here's what you should do. Like I've
Right.
lived this. I mean, my shirt. Well, I do a keynote called "I'm Still Standing, Rising."
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm owning this. Like I'm celebrating the fact that I'm literally still here. And so that is just what inspires me to share the lessons I've learned and to share the insights that I've gained in the midst of my own journey of burnout and resilience.
Awesome. So I mean, there's so many different places that we can kind of start this conversation. I think, you know, one of the things that I guess kind of my starting point is in terms of how we respond to a stressor, just maybe it's a negative event, something intense, whatever the case is. And there's, you kind of outline two different ways to respond. And on paper, it kind of seems pretty self-explanatory, but I think that there's some good details to cover here. But, in your opinion, when it comes to how we deal with stressful events or whatever the
Mhm.
case may be, what's kind of the real difference between being reactive and being responsive?
Mhm. So, a couple things to know. First of all, I want to reframe stress on the front end of this. There's a book called The Upside of Stress. Highly recommend checking it out by Dr. Kelly McGonigal out of Stanford University. And one of the things she says, I read this book, I think around the time I was going through my burnout journey 5 years ago, because I was like, there's got to be some upside to this. And she said something that stuck with me ever since. She said, stress is what arises when something we care about is at stake.
Mm.
So the goal is not to get rid of it. Actually, stress can be, if you think about when you've had like a tight deadline or you've had a project you're working on that you really, really, really care about, and you have this just flood of adrenaline that comes and it unleashes this creativity and you're able to rise to the challenge. Like there's different types of stress responses, and some can be really helpful. Um, and so I just want to kind of
Yeah.
start by putting that out there, because the idea of getting rid of stress, like if you got rid of stress, you would have no motivation. You would just sit like a bump on a log and wouldn't do anything. So
Yeah, it's
we
true.
need we need stress. It's just the extent to which we can manage it, which I know we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
So when I think of, so one of the things I've learned, I have a friend, Sam Karashi, who is a psychiatrist, and I have learned so much from him over the past 3 years. And I love one of the things he says about defining what a response is that a response, he defines it as a delayed reaction. So when we think of what a reaction is, it's this kind of immediate knee jerk fight or flight, without conscious thought, way of engaging with a trigger or an external stressor. And it's what's typically happening in that moment when we're having a reaction is we feel our safety feels threatened. So whenever our psychological safety or our physical safety feels threatened in some way, the brain goes into fight or flight mode, because the brain's number one job is to keep you alive. Number one job of the brain is anything that could potentially threaten my survival, I need to be really attuned to. So we've gotten really, really good, biologically hardwired to have this negativity bias, to overly focus on things that could harm us, and to unfortunately underlearn from things that are beneficial. So when you think of what we've experienced, in the midst of the pandemic and all of that, among other things, what's been happening is we've been in this chronic state of like fight or flight of alert mode, this heightened state of alert, which is not normal to be in a chronic heightened state of alert. It takes a toll on the brain.
Right.
So that is when I think that's what that reaction is, that fight or flight. I got to protect myself, and I'm not really thinking of the consequence. I'm doing something in this moment to protect myself in some way. A response. One of the things I love, Viktor Frankl, who is a
Mm.
Holocaust survivor who wrote the
Yeah.
book Man's Search for Meaning, which I would also again invite anyone to check out. Man's Search for Meaning. Really, really just good perspective, I think, especially in what we're going through
Right.
now. True perspective. And one of the things that he says, is his famous quote. He says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies our power to choose our response. And he says, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so the response acknowledges there's a stimulus. The reaction says stimulus, boom. The response says stimulus, space, response. So the difference is we're taking some time to engage in some conscious thought before we do something, before we take action. We're often considering what the longer term outcome is. Now, the challenge is because we're in this state of being so triggered and because there's so many threats, either perceived or real, all around us.
Yeah.
It's hard for people to access the responsiveness in the moment. And it's more likely, you don't have to look very far, social media, to see this.
Yeah.
But it's much easier to just go into reaction mode, and people are not thinking clearly before they're posting things or saying things or texting things.
Yeah.
So if you want, at some day I can teach a practice. I mean, we could teach a couple practices, but about one of the ways that we can calm down the reactive part of the brain.
Yeah. So, I mean, why do you think that? Because obviously it didn't, I feel like it didn't used to be like that. Everyone, not everyone, I don't want to generalize, but it seems like a lot of people are very quick to react now. And it's not, and it's a relatively extreme reaction, and maybe it's not necessarily how they truly feel in that moment, or that's how they feel in that moment, but not how they truly feel all of the time.
Yeah.
But why do you think it seems like we have much more of those extreme reactions now? Is it just because of the rise of social media and just kind of we have access to kind of everyone's voice, and we can kind of just have those unfiltered things and we don't really think about the, I guess, kind of consequences of these unfiltered thoughts? Like, I don't know. What is your thought on just kind of why we have so many like off the cuff, really hard reactions to things now?
We have 5 hours. There's, I mean, I have a couple initial thoughts in response to that. One is that before the pandemic, we were already in the midst of an epidemic of loneliness. We were already in the middle of that. And we see, holy cow, how much that's been exacerbated. So exacerbated. We are social creatures. We are wired for social interaction, whether or not you're introverted or extroverted. We are wired for social connection. We are hardwired. It is built in for our survival. We need people in the however many years ago, like if they were on their own running around, in the bush, like they did not survive. Like the people that were part of a tribe survived.
Yeah.
And so I think a number of things have happened. Our connections to genuine community, whether it's through, you think people used to be involved in civic groups, or people used to be involved in faith communities, or people were part of neighborhoods where people lived close to each other and were able to connect consistently. They lived and worked in the same towns, in the same neighborhoods. I mean, now we're so dispersed, right? We're so geographically dispersed. The sense of almost civic obligation to be a good neighbor and to connect with your neighbors and to check in on them, I think has been lost. I think with social media, there's a perception of connection, of like, oh, I have this many friends or I have this many connections, and yet I'm still feeling so lonely because I haven't really been courageous enough to be vulnerable with any of those people, to really let them see who I actually am deep down. And I'm afraid that if they really saw who I was, or they learned certain things about me, they would reject me. So I'm just going to put on a facade of who I am, and I'm not actually going to let anyone get in. But in the midst of that, I'm going to feel lonely on the back end, because the only way that we really foster that sense of deep, meaningful connection is through intentional and consistent interactions with other people. And so I think one of the things is just that we've been in a state of loneliness. I think another one, as I mentioned, is just the ways of connecting in community have kind of have disappeared, honestly. We've relied too much on social media. And I've made friends on social media. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And this is not to like poo-poo and say social media is evil. But the reality is, like, there's so much of a facade that people are living behind, I think, because of social media. And they're looking at the validation. I have been validated by likes, let's not pretend. But they're looking at that as a barometer of their value. And I think people have poured themselves so much into their work. We have made work everything. We have made work everything for the sake of getting ahead, for the sake of, hey, when I'm at work, I feel competent. And when I feel competent, I feel like I'm valuable. And when I feel valuable, I feel like I matter. And at home, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So I'm just going to pour myself into work all the time because that's the place where I find value. And so my identity is going to be totally so tied to my job. And if anything affects my job, my identity totally crashes.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a confluence of just a number of things in society. And again, this is scratching like 5% of the surface. So I just want to
Right. Right.
I want to caveat my response with that. I think really that's what a lot of it's been. And then people are dealing with trauma.
Yeah.
Everybody has been through little T trauma or big T trauma and they haven't gotten help. I'm a huge advocate of therapy. I see a therapist every Saturday,
Yeah.
mainly from the PTSD from my car accident, but it's really ended up helping with a lot of other things. And I think every adult would benefit from seeing a trained therapist to help them process things in their life, because we don't learn these. You don't learn these skills in school. You don't
Right.
learn these skills at home. Nobody learns how to navigate the difficult things they've been through and to how to make sense of them and how to process them and move through them. And so you have a bunch of like 5-year-olds running around disguised as like 55-year-olds that haven't dealt with their stuff.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, inciting each other. That really, as a collective, I think is what I think is what's some of what's going on.
Yeah. And to your point, just about therapy and just kind of, asking for help and just talking to someone, I think, especially in the legal industry, it's full of people who have just been told their entire lives, like, oh, you're incredibly smart, you're incredibly gifted, like you are amazing, you've got this. And you almost get to this point where it's like, all right, people tell me I'm great, I should be able to figure this out on my
Yes.
own. And there's almost that little bit of stubbornness there. Um, but then on the other side of things, you kind of also have these people who I think understand empathy, and and they may think, well, I mean, all right, yes, I've got some stuff going on, but like, it's not as bad as like these other people. And like,
Yes.
I'm not as bad off as them. So like I should be able to just handle this on my own.
Yes.
And I feel
Yes.
like that can still be problematic because,
Oh,
you
yes.
know, but how do you still get over that hump and still
Mhm.
just, reach out and still get help, even if objectively, yes, you're in a better position than other people, but it's still what's going to push you forward.
Yeah. So I'm going to define what you just talked about. There's a name for it. It's called comparative suffering. When we do this thing where we're like, well, my dad calls it the pain Olympics, which I think is hilarious. Um, so comparative suffering is like, well, this person, I had people do this to me after my car accident, and they're like, well, at least anything that starts with well, at least is comparative suffering, and it completely
Right.
diminishes the other person's experience, and it's the opposite of empathy. So when someone says, well, at least you didn't need to have rods in your back. At
Mhm.
least you did. I'm like, I got hit by a flipping pickup truck. Would you like to trade places for right now? I don't think so.
Right.
Like, so we do this game where here's what I say it's analogous to everyone's carrying around an invisible backpack. Everyone carries around an invisible backpack. And you don't know what's in it. You don't know how many bricks, how many weights somebody has in their backpack. But on the surface, we're all like, I'm fine. And meanwhile, we might be like feeling like we're falling over because the weight is so heavy, but we're the type of person who is supposed to have it together. And I get this. So a high achiever, straight A student, did not let anybody in, did not ask for help, ended up burned out and bottomed out, realized that what I was doing was not working. And again, very independent, daughter of entrepreneurs, figure it out, do it yourself. If you think of the field of law, like to be vulnerable, no, that's not an option.
Right.
Vulnerability is not an option. Like you're in the state of of protecting and risk mitigation. Vulnerability is like the ultimate risk that you could take as a human being, to be
Yeah.
vulnerable. And if you're in the and if what you do is to mitigate risk, why would you want to be vulnerable?
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
so to think about it that way and to say, look, at the end of the day, there's a question that I often ask. I was doing work with a global consulting firm a couple years ago, and I was doing a training with one of their with a group of their project managers. And there was a woman who was in that session. I was talking about burnout, and I asked a question um, of who gets the best of you and who gets what's left of you.
Mm.
Who gets the best of you and who gets what's left of you? because so often our job gets the best of us.
Right.
And we think it's the best of us, but truly, if you're not running on all cylinders because you're exhausted and depleted and burned out, your job really is not getting the best of you. So, side note, as
Right.
someone who's been there, um, we can tell ourselves all kinds of stories about how we're really killing it and we're really not.
Right.
Um, but I started to realize who was getting what's like my leftovers was my husband and my friends and my nieces and nephews and all the people in my life that like really mattered the most to me.
Yeah.
My ego was getting a lot of attention because I convinced myself that my clients were the most important. Like I could not disappoint them. But these other people, if I disappoint them, they're going to stick around. But if I disappoint a client, they're going to leave.
Mm.
Who's going to show up at your flipping funeral? Like, honestly.
Right.
And I don't mean to, but I'm serious.
Yeah.
Like, we take certain aspects of our lives way too seriously. And there's a book. We're going to give lots of book recommendations for folks. I know these people like to read.
Yeah.
I might like, right, dig in. There's a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying by a woman named Bronnie Ware, who was a palliative care nurse who spent time with people on their deathbeds. And she pulled out 5 key themes from when people are at the end of their lives. What were the biggest regrets they had?
Mm.
And the number one regret people had, number one regret on their deathbed, it wasn't, man, I wished I'd closed another deal. I wish
Right.
I'd stayed that Saturday at the office. It was, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me.
Yeah.
Number one regret. Along those lists were, I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. I wish that I hadn't worked so hard, was one of their top regrets. I wish I'd let myself be happier. I wish I'd let myself be happier was one of the top regrets of people on their deathbed. And so for anyone listening right now, I would just invite you to say, like, what's it all for? And like, what matters? A mentor of mine who passed away, unfortunately, to October of 2021 of a brain tumor, brilliant man, Dr. Danny Friedland. He was a leader in the conscious capitalism movement around conscious leadership.
Mm.
In his 50s, healthy as a horse. I mean, healthy as a horse, just the kindest guy, like just this magnetic energy, you know? December of 2020, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, with brain cancer, really aggressive brain cancer. It's two sons, you know,
Yeah.
late teens, early 20s, a beautiful wife who he just adores. And he didn't even make it a year. And one of the questions that he would always ask us to reflect on is what matters most? Like, what matters most now?
Yeah.
What matters most now? And if we're really honest about ourselves and we think about that, it's not the things that we spend so much time stressing over most when it comes to work. It's really not, because if your job disappeared or if those you love disappeared, which one would have a greater effect on you? For sure. If your support system disappeared, that would have a greater effect on your life. You
Yeah.
can find another job,
Yeah.
you know? So anyway.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I don't have anything else to add on that. So let's kind of move kind of to kind of back, something that we mentioned before, we're talking about stress and just kind of how we react to it and kind of navigating it. Walk us through just kind of the basic stress cycle and ways that we can better train ourselves to navigate it so that it doesn't wear us out as much, if that's even possible.
You're like asking for a friend.
Yeah.
So there's always this external stressor, right? There's a stimulus. There's something on the outside that we then have an internal appraisal of. So our brain's like, all right, it's doing this very, very quickly without our conscious awareness. How much of a threat or a danger is this?
Mhm.
Right? And like, how much of a threat or a danger? If our brain perceived it as something that's really dangerous, often we'll have a physiological shift before we have a conscious awareness. So you'll notice you get sweaty palms. You'll notice that your face might get flush. Your heart rate increases. Your body temperature rises. These are all physiological responses to some form of threat. They can also be a physiological response to something that's really exciting. So they often, tell you to kind of shift whatever your appraisal is of a situation. So when public speaking, for instance, people, as a public speaker, people are like, "Oh my gosh, how do you do it?" I'm like, well, I just choose to interpret my physiology differently. I interpret my heart rate increase as I'm excited to do this, not I'm dreading this. So
Right.
there's an appraisal of some kind that happens, and then we have these physiological responses that I mentioned. And at the same time this is happening, if we feel like we're in that threat state, what's happening is so there's two branches of your nervous system. There's your sympathetic branch of your nervous system, which is like your foot on the gas, full speed ahead. That's like fight or flight. Like most people have had their foot on the gas for a year and a half,
Right.
which is why we're so darn exhausted. Okay.
Mhm.
You have another branch of your nervous system called the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. And the parasympathetic branch is known as the brake. It's known as the brake. And so when we can put our foot on the brake, that causes things to like slow down and can cause things to shut down too. So when we're in a state of like, I have to survive, I have to be able to fight, or I have to be able to flee, or I'm going to freeze, or whatever it is that we have to do, what happens is our like immune system and our digestive system shut down, because what's happening is, okay, we gotta pump all that adrenaline into our muscles because we gotta get ready to fight. It's so ancient, our response. It's so
Yeah.
ancient, right? We're not running from tigers, but we still have the same physiological response. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And so then we have this experience of, again, increased heart rate, right? All of that, and then we decide what we're going to do about it, and we have some type of a coping mechanism that's used in order to alleviate the discomfort that we're feeling, right? Because that's often what's happening, is there's this discomfort, we're not sure that we really like it, and so we do something to alleviate it. Now we can alleviate it in non-life-giving ways, for instance with alcohol, like we numb out, with other substances. We can do it even just by like numbing out and binge watching TV, or just mindlessly scrolling on social media. We can lash out, right? That's another thing that that's a reaction, right? But we can lash out, which again, we're
Yeah.
seeing a lot of. So those are perhaps the less like life-giving forms of coping. Um, and again, we don't learn this stuff. It's amazing. It's like we learn how to do algebra and we don't learn how to cope with our own emotions,
Right.
which is more important. And I love math, but you know, so there's other ways that we can choose to respond. So I learned from Dr. Danny Friedland an approach called pause, breathe, notice, and choose. So the first is the pause, right? If we're in a state where we can, and again, when we're in reaction mode, we're not taking the time to pause because it's immediate, it's knee jerk.
Right.
We have the conscious awareness to, in the moment, to pause. There's a practice called 4-7-8 breathing that I teach in all of the work that I do with organizations. And interestingly, it's the thing that like CEOs of companies will follow up, like their assistants will follow up with me later. They're like, man, he really loves that thing. He talks about it all. Like, it's so simple. But the way that it works is this 4-7-8 breathing practice. You can do it like 5 or 6 times to really kind of begin to reset your body. What it does is it calms down the reactive part of your brain, and it tells your brain and body that you're safe. And when your brain and body are like, okay, we're safe. Okay, now we can access our higher level thinking that's going to help us make meaning of this, or have a more thoughtful response, or have a conscious response in some way. And so we pause, we breathe. And so it works as you breathe in through the nose into the lower belly for a count of 4. You hold your breath for a count of 7. And then you exhale, audible exhale for a count of 8. And I'm happy to do a round of it just to guide folks that are with us right now, if you'd like.
I was literally doing it while you were talking.
Okay, perfect. All right. All right. So I'll invite everyone. This is what I invite people to do, to get in a, if you can, I know I'm standing, but if you are seated, to get in a comfortable seated position with your feet flat on the floor. If I tell people, if you'd like to close your eyes, you can, because closing our eyes further reduces stimulation to the nervous system, because we have stimuli all around us, and just simply closing our eyes actually reduces stimulation to the nervous system. And if we don't feel safe, we can't close our eyes, because think about it. If you're in a state of danger, right, you're not going to close your eyes. You got to be on the lookout. So
Exactly.
it's another way we shift our physiology to shift our psychology. So close your eyes and hands on your lower belly. We're going to pretend like we're expanding a balloon. And then on the exhale, it's like we're releasing air from the balloon. And the power, for those, I know there's a very analytical group listening, the power of the breathing practice is on the long, slow, extended exhale. It's the long, slow, extended exhale that activates and flips on the switch of the calm branch of the nervous system. So the whole practice is important, but But what really shifts things is that long, slow, extended exhale.
Hmm.
So we're going to just do one round. I would encourage folks to do like 4, 5, 6 rounds of this when you're having a moment where you're feeling triggered, or you're feeling your physiology shift in a way you don't want it to get your
Right.
whole brain, to get your full brain online and not just your reactive brain. Okay. Close your eyes if you'd like. Here we go. I'm going to guide us through. Breathe in the nose into the lower belly for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I would encourage, I usually do 2 rounds. I'd encourage folks to like rewind, just
Yes.
do that a few times. Did you notice anything? I'm curious. It's only 1, so it's hard to really say if anything, you notice anything.
Yeah. I mean, I was pretty calm going in. So like, cause like I'm used to doing this, like I'm in my element right now. So like I'm comfortable, but yeah, I mean, I did feel a little bit more relaxed coming out of it. And, so I can vouch.
Yeah.
It is effective.
And at least 2 rounds, I think, makes a difference. Again, 4 to 5
Yeah.
can really start to shift things, especially if people have trouble. A lot of people have trouble going to sleeping. A lot of people have trouble with sleep. I would recommend first of all, there's 2 devices I would recommend. I've worn a device on my wrist called a Whoop band for the past 3 years. And it tracks all sorts of, as somebody who like tells myself, I'm fine, I can keep going, I've got it. I learned when I burned out that I can't always trust my own judgment of how fine I am.
Right.
And so this is like an external biomarker tracker, more or less, that is used by athletes. Like Michael Phelps uses it, a lot of professional athletes, a lot of Olympic athletes, neither of which I am, but I've still found benefit into using this because it tracks your sleep in a way that's much more robust than like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch. So a Whoop is one, WHOOP, and then an Aura ring, OURA, is another thing. It's less obtrusive. It's like an actual ring. Some people might wear it in place of, but I have one coming to me. I know people that have used it, so I'm going to be like double data. I don't know. It just helps me to understand.
Yeah.
Like I stayed up late last night ordering Christmas gifts on Shutterfly, and I went to bed too late, and I woke up this morning and my recovery was down. And I knew that it would be, because whenever I stay up late staring at the computer until almost 11 o'clock, and then I try to just fall asleep, it doesn't work as well. And so
Yeah.
I've monitored myself long enough that like I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
I knew that was going to happen. So anyway, that practice, that 4-7-8 breathing, we pause, we breathe, and we notice, and just notice, like, what am I feeling? Where am I sensing it? Oh, I noticed I had tension in my chest. Somebody yesterday said, oh, I noticed my back felt warm, or my neck released. Or we're not aware most of the time of the fact that we're in a body.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
you're in a body. And there's a book, one of my favorite books, called The Body Keeps the Score, that I would recommend every human read. And Brain, Mind, and Body and the Healing of Trauma. Whether or not you think you've had capital T trauma in the sense of, things that are often, covered on the news or something like that, everyone has had something in their life that has, shifted something in them in some way. It's a powerful book. So the breathing is powerful, doing things like yoga is powerful. Laughter, like laughter gives us a physiological release. Crying gives us a physiological release. Singing, humming, and chanting activate the same nerve that called the vagus nerve. Not like Las Vegas. I say like Las Vegas, like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in the vagus nerve, VAGUS, actually affects all these organ systems on the way down from your brainstem to your digestive system, and you can activate that by singing, humming, and chanting.
Interesting.
Which is why like yoga is powerful, because yoga is like breathing, movement, and humming or chanting. That's why when people are like, do yoga, that's why. So those are a few. Connection, social connectedness is a huge one. Hugging. There's so many other things, but those are a few of some healthier forms of coping.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm definitely I'm gonna keep the breathing technique in mind, because like, admittedly, like I'll go to bed at like 9:30, which probably a decent time, but a lot of nights I will struggle to turn my brain off. Like it's still going, just thoughts, all kinds of thoughts, not even good thought, like not like productive thoughts or anything like that. It's just all the random stuff that I couldn't think about during the day because I was busy focusing on other stuff. So like I'll lay in bed for like 2 hours until I finally just exhaust myself out and fall asleep. So I'm going to try the breathing technique and I'll report back to you to see, you know, to see if there's some improvement there.
I have another tip for you for that, by the way. What you
Yeah.
just shared, because I'm sure
Yes.
everyone's like nodding their heads, like yes. It's called like monkey mind, where it's just like you lay down and like the symbols start going in your head, and you're like, oh my gosh, I just want to go to bed. One is having at least 30, ideally 60 minutes of zero looking at screens before you go to bed, because the blue light in our devices tells our brain that it's daytime. There's a gland in your brain called the pineal gland. And when that sees blue light, it's just like you're out in the sun in the middle of the day. And it's like, oh, it's daytime. And then we're like, let me just shut my laptop or put my phone down and go to bed. So I don't sleep with my phone next to my bed. I sleep with it on the other side of the room. It does have my alarm on it, which means I have to get up to turn off my alarm, which is really annoying. But that's important. So one is that looking at devices really, really, really does affect our ability to calm the brain down to go to bed. So ideally at least an hour before you go to bed. No tablet, no TV is different because you're really far away from it. When you're on a device, you're typically within a foot of it.
Yeah.
And it's not, so so the biggest issue is these devices. That's one. Two, there's an exercise you can do called a brain dump, where you have a piece of paper and a pen, not on your phone in the notes section. You have a notebook next to your bed where before you're going to bed, you just jot down brain dump. These are the things on my mind. These things on my mind. And just like putting a list of them, because as long as you're recycling it around in your head, your brain feels like we need to do something with this. We haven't done something with this. We haven't done something with this. And if you write it down on paper, oh, we temporarily did something with this. We can't do anything about it till tomorrow anyway, but we can sort of trick our brain into thinking, oh, we've started to address this.
Yeah.
So that might be a practice. The breathing combined with the getting rid of the device for the last hour of the day. Wearing blue blocker. I wear blue blocker glasses. So if you are going to be looking at a device later at night, and then the brain dump. So hopefully, I don't know, I would say try some of those things.
Yes, definitely. I've done the brain dumping before because I do a lot of writing. And so like normally that's when all of my writing ideas show up, is when I'm trying to go to sleep. So, and I've found that a lot of times once I finally get those ideas in my head synthesized and written out, like I'll be asleep a few minutes later. So yeah, I can vouch for that one as well. Do you have time for one more big question?
Yes.
Awesome. So another kind of tip that you talk about that helps people are thought charts. So tell us, like, what exactly is a thought chart and how does it help?
Sure. So I just want to first and foremost say that like a therapist would best be able to delineate this for somebody and guide them through it. But this is my rudimentary explanation of it. So I always like to be like asterisk, which I'm sure the listening audience understands, right? Disclaimer. Right. So it's a technique used in cognitive behavioral therapy. And so to simplify it, there's an event or trigger that happens, right? So you can think of a situation where you were triggered by something. So it might be, in this case, a panicked client just reached out to you. You're like, trigger, right? Trigger, trigger, trigger. You then have a series of what are called ANTs, automatic negative thoughts. You don't control the first thought that hits your brain. You don't. Sorry. No one does. No one controls the first thought that arises. So the series of thoughts, and I sort of jotted these out knowing the audience, so to see if these resonate with you. I'm exhausted, beyond exhausted. People are coming to me for advice, but I don't have the answers they want. So much is still uncertain and constantly changing. What if I misadvise them? I don't want to get it wrong, but the stakes are high. There's so much to do and not enough time to do it. And we just lost another group of associates, so their work has been added to the team. I'm struggling, but I don't want anyone to think I can't handle it. So I'm just going to try to keep holding it together and keep my head down. This is so hard and I'm tired.
Yeah.
Automatic negative thoughts. Now we can spin those around, which is what a lot of us do. Just keep spinning. Oh my gosh, I'm so exhausted. And then we like up until we, just completely collapse, or have a breakdown of some kind. The response that we can give ourselves, there's a couple things we can do. We can challenge the thoughts of like, Does anyone think that you can't handle it? Like, how true is that? We can challenge kind of the veracity of these stories that we're telling ourselves, right? The story I'm telling myself is all the things I just said, and here's what I'm making up. All right, how true is any of that? How true is that? Like, is that true? What evidence and proof do you have that that is absolutely definitively true?
Right.
Like in my case, I thought, oh, I'm the wellness person. Geez, if I ask for help, people are going to think I'm incompetent. What evidence? Tell me about a time where you asked for help and people thought you were incompetent. Well, I don't actually have a specific example, but I just think that if I did, then that, right. So
Yeah.
we're like caught in our own nonsense. The ideally what happens is we have this event trigger automatic negative thoughts, and then we can respond with self-compassion and a plan of action. So self-compassion sounds like, it's normal to be feeling anxious and tired in the face of so much change. This is normal. Anyone else, so we connect to our shared humanity, anyone else would feel the same way in this situation. I'm not alone. So what self-compassion looks like is it says, one, it's giving ourselves a bit of grace. And it's saying, this is a shared human experience. I'm not alone. Because so often when we're in that state of fear and threat, we're often feeling isolated or alone in some way. And that is like, because our number one job is to be kept safe. On top of that, it's to belong, right? That sense of if we don't feel like we belong, that actually activates, we have social rejection that activates the same parts of the brain that light up when we're in physical pain. Same
Yeah.
parts of the brain light up when we're in social rejection and physical pain. And so, it's really important to recognize that we have to feel that sense of connection of, I'm not the only one dealing with this. There's nothing wrong with me. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with me.
Yeah.
That I am feeling this way. There may be something that needs to be addressed, but you are not inherently flawed.
Right.
And so there's a phrase I invite people to reflect on and remind themselves of, I'm doing the best I can with what I have in this moment. And that's all I can expect of anyone, including me.
Yeah.
So I'm doing the best I can with the resources, the energy, the time, the experience, the support, the know-how, the knowledge, the insight, the guidance that I have in the moment.
Yeah.
And that I can't expect any more than that, because that's not a reasonable expectation. And so when I start to spin out, I can focus on what I can control. And even making yourself a list for everyone listening right now,
Yeah.
make a list when you're in a good headspace. What are all of the things you can control? You can control your response. You can control what media you expose yourself to. You can control your attitude. You can control the words you use. You can control the extent to which you are kind and show grace to other people. You can, right? You can
Yeah.
control the food that you put in your body. You can control the extent to which you move your body. You can, right, how much TV you watch. You can control a lot of things.
Yeah.
You can control your breathing. You can take a walk. You can take a break. You can see a therapist. You can listen to music. You can watch comedy. I mean, my goodness, I've lived on like Ted Lasso, Schitt's Creek, The Office, Parks and Recreation reruns.
Yeah.
Like I've needed comedy. Sebastian Maniscalco, Trey Kennedy. I mean, my husband and I love to laugh,
Yeah.
and laughter is a very valid form of physiological and emotional release. We can control the extent to which we ask for help and reach out to other people. So when we have these moments of feeling really isolated and alone, which I've been there, right? I was terrified to ask for help. Oh my gosh. I remember after my car accident, a woman reached out to me the day after because she found out what happened. And I'd never met her before, but we were serving on a panel about, virtual employee engagement 2 weeks later. And she reached out and she said, I want to set up a meal train for you and your husband. And I did the comparative suffering thing where I was like, I mean, people who are like dealing with cancer or like just had a baby or just had a surgery or just lost a loved one, like they're the people that deserve the meal train. Like
Right.
we're financially able to do takeout if we need to do that for however long while I'm recovering from this and can't bend or lift or twist or be helpful at all at the house. While my husband is virtually teaching, he's a teacher.
Yeah.
And so my initial response was like a lot of us, my initial response was to be like, I'm fine, we've got it. Because that's what we do, right? When we're
Yeah.
people that handle stuff, we don't need other people's help. We don't want to burden them. We tell ourselves, even though they're offering, we're like, I don't want to burden. They're like, no, I'm offering you.
Yeah.
And we somehow flip it around and pretend like we're the problem. So I paused, paused, and I noticed, I'm like, what are you like, Rachel, somebody wants to help you and you're in a lot of pain and this is going to be harder than you know. You're one day in.
Yeah.
I did not know that I was going to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning with muscle spasms for weeks on end, or that I was going to be sleeping in a recliner for 3 months. And, like I didn't know all of these things were going to be happening. And I wrote back and I said, that would be wonderful. And we got on a call that night and she spent 45 minutes with me setting up a website to get this meal train coordinated. And for the next 5 weeks, we had people bringing by meals. She insisted that her husband drop off our first meal from our favorite restaurant. She threw in a bonus dessert. People sent us cards, people sent gifts, people dropped things by, they sent flowers. I mean, I felt so incredibly supported. And it was because, you know, 3 years earlier, 2 years earlier, 3 years earlier, I had learned in my burnout journey how much I could not do it alone and how much I did not have to do it alone.
Yeah.
And I had learned to start flexing the ask for help muscle and receiving it as well without guilt or shame in 2017. And it was those reps of practicing that and over that period of time of learning to ask for help and starting to see a therapist, that I was able to now 3 years later be in a position where somebody offered and I was quicker to say yes. And if anyone wanted to help, I said, yes, please. Because when we say no to someone who wants to help us, we are robbing them of the opportunity of having a moment of feeling like they matter and feeling like they have something to contribute. It is so life-giving to feel like we are making a meaningful contribution to the life of another person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we rob people of that when our ego says, I've got this. I don't need anything. I don't need you. I don't need help. And again, been there, speaking from experience. And let me tell you how much better it is to just say yes to anyone who wants to help and to just receive it with open arms and just bask in how it feels to be poured into and to be loved that way. I mean, it is healing. I mean, it has been a part of my healing process, psychologically, physically, and mentally, to learn to receive help and support from people without guilt or shame or judgment.
Yeah. And we've talked about this on some past episodes, and just like we as an office and just me personally have been doing a lot of learning, in this entire space. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Strength Finders. I think it's Clifton Strengths now.
Yes.
But, we took that earlier this year and positivity was my lowest strength. And, and obviously that doesn't mean that I'm an inherently negative person,
No.
but to your point though, especially with the automatic negative thoughts and we also did Enneagram, and just my base reaction is fear. And so to your point, like I really resonate with that, with the idea that like something happens and it's just a flood of these negative thoughts and the fear and all of that. And the one thing that I've learned, and I think that this is helpful for everybody, is that it's always going to be just a constant work in progress. Like it's not going to be something that you master in a week or in a month or even a year. Even if you're going to therapy and you're talking to a therapist like every day, like even then, like it's never going to be something that you master. It's always something that you have to be conscious of and always be working towards. But I think being in that mindset and being aware of it is a huge first step in sort of, alleviating a lot of the stress and at least being aware of it and understanding how you can react to it so that it doesn't burn you out at all, if possible, but at least not as much. And just a lot of small things that you can do to really just make big improvements in your own mental health. And that's just been really huge for me personally this year, going through and learning a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of both of those. I would encourage anyone listening, if you haven't already, check out Clifton Strengths and then Enneagram. What's your Enneagram?
I'm a 5.
5. Okay, so is my dad. I'm a 3, which is an achiever. So for anyone listening, right? And it's just helpful to know these things about yourself. That the more we can understand ourselves, the more self-awareness we can develop, and the more self-aware we are, the more likely we're going to be able to self-regulate. I'll share one last quick tip. I know we're like almost at time, but I'll share one last quick tip around that. I did realize I didn't share. is there's a practice if you do notice yourself kind of caught up in something, caught up in an emotion, naming it. There's a practice by Dan Siegel, who has really been at the forefront of I'm talking about emotional intelligence and, bringing that into our awareness. Is he has a practice called Name It to Tame It. So just the act of naming an emotion, just naming an emotion and saying, I'm noticing, instead of like, I am angry. I am angry makes it about identity, and I am statement is an identity statement.
Yeah.
And it's harder to shake that versus we say, I'm noticing or I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Like I'm feeling angry, right? Like I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling, and there's a book called Permission to Feel, written by Mark Brackett, who's out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And so I would encourage everyone listening to check out that book. It's good for you. Good if you got kids. It's good for understanding and helping kids process emotions. Some schools are using their frameworks. So that would be something that I would check out too, because the act of naming an emotion, the act of counting our breath, those are activities that happen in our higher brain. That when we're acting out of our higher brain, we're naturally moving ourselves out of that more reactive state. So that's just another thing, another tip, another book recommendation
Yeah.
that I would share. And again, a huge huge advocate of those tools. And even looking at your list, if you have taken StrengthsFinder, if responsibility is high, typically people that have higher levels of responsibility, especially responsibility combined with harmony. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. That's me. Yep.
Responsibility and harmony, that is a recipe for burnout. So just something for people to be aware of. Harmony is like my number 34. There's only 34. It's my husband's number 1, which is hilarious. I'm like, we really do balance each other out.
Yeah.
But achiever is my number, a strategic achiever. So it's like anyone with achiever also has a propensity to burn out.
Oh, got 3 of them. There are 3 in my top 10.
Well, now we have more understanding, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, we have. So we have. Hang on. So one of the things that we did is we built out. If you're watching on video, we built out these personality indexes. And so it's got Enneagram on one side, StrengthsFinder on the other, and so it's got my top 10 on there. And yeah, achiever, responsibility, harmony, just great. So.
Just great.
I'm learning that if I don't watch myself, I'm gonna crash and burn in a spectacular fashion. But no, this has been absolutely incredible. Just a lot of good insight and information. Before we wrap up, how can people learn more about you and maybe find where you're speaking next?
Yeah. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm super active on there. I love when people message and say, hey, heard you on the show. This is what I enjoyed. So please, I don't think that's weird. I don't think it's stalkerish. For some people think that's like stalkerish or weird to do. No, I think it's amazing. And both of us love to getting those messages.
Yes.
So again, Rachel Druckenmiller on LinkedIn. My website is unmutedlife.com. And I often get brought in directly working with associations or firms, to do trainings, leadership retreats, workshops, keynotes, really anything where they're looking to bring somebody in to ignite some degree of hope and resilience and connection, and not keep it at the surface. Like we're gonna talk about what's happening underneath, as hopefully people have experienced today. Like I'm not gonna give you a bunch of positivity platitudes and tell you to move on. We're gonna get in there because I really want. My goal is transformation and impact. Like if I've left an experience and at least a handful of people don't feel awakened, ignited, transformed, or significantly impacted, then I don't feel like I've done my job. So that's what I would say. I'd say LinkedIn. I also have a newsletter on LinkedIn that I do bi-weekly called Unmute Yourself.
Okay.
So if people want to subscribe to that newsletter, I can share the link with you for that as well. So those are the best places to find me.
Awesome. So before we end the show, I do have one final question that we ask all of our guests here.
Yeah.
And that is, if you had one piece of advice for our audience out there, what would it be?
One piece of advice, and it's been a thread through this whole conversation, is ask for the help and support that you need. You are not a burden. You are not too much. Your needs matter. It is not weak for you to ask for the help and support that you need. And there is at least one person in your life that if they knew you were struggling and they could do something to help, that they would want to know that. So ask for that help and support. We do not get through this life very easily when we do it alone. So reach out and be willing to receive what comes back.
Awesome. Love it. That is going to do it for us this week. Continue to rate, review on Apple Podcasts and wherever you're consuming the show. And that's it. Rachel, thanks so much for your time this week.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yes, loved it. Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to spotlightbranding.com/centerstage.